I used to think I knew my boss. 8 years, same office, same 7:40 a.m. arrival, same chipped mug that said, Monday's not real. He wasn't loud or charming or the kind of man who gave pep talks. He just showed up every day like gravity. Quiet, dependable, always there when everything else felt like chaos. When I got the call that morning, I didn't even understand the words at first. Mr. Hale passed away last night. Passed away like it was just a transfer to another department. The woman from HR kept talking. Massive heart attack, in his sleep. And I remember staring at the spreadsheet on my screen, one cell blinking where I'd left it. My hand didn't move for maybe a full minute. They closed the office for the afternoon. The air in the break room smelled like burnt coffee and sympathy. People whispered the same phrases, recycled grief. He was such a good man, always so calm. Didn't deserve this. I stood by the window, trying to picture what his apartment must have looked like that morning. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't even know if he lived alone. The funeral was 2 days later. Small chapel, cheap lilies, more accountants than family. The kind of silence that hums between the verses of a hymn. When it ended, I lingered, not because I was close to him, but because I didn't know how to leave. That's when a man in a navy suit approached me. Gray hair, lawyer face. You're Andrew Collins? Yes. He nodded, checked a list, then handed me a small sealed envelope. Cream paper, heavy. My name on it, handwritten, not printed. He asked me to give you this. Inside were two things, a brass office key and a short note. 6 words. Check the files behind the frames. No signature, no explanation. I stood there holding that paper while people filed out of the chapel, my own name echoing in my head. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the words in his voice, behind the frames. Mr. Hale's office was covered in framed photos, awards, old newspaper clippings, one family portrait that no one ever talked about. I used to joke that the walls had more certificates than the rest of us had pay raises. Now I kept seeing them in my mind, like a map I'd ignored. By 2 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table, the key beside my coffee. It was ridiculous, I told myself. Whatever it wasn't meant for me. And yet, he'd chosen me out of everyone. Not his assistant, not HR, not the senior staff. Me, the guy who stayed late, who never asked for anything, who thought loyalty was its own kind of promotion. At 3:15, I put on a jacket and drove downtown. The building was dark except for the streetlight reflecting off the lobby glass. Security had been cut back since Hale's death. No overnight guard, just cameras and a motion sensor I knew how to avoid. Old habits. I still had my key card. The office floor was a ghost town, monitors blank, chairs turned outward like they'd been left mid-conversation. His door was still sealed with a strip of blue tape. Do not enter. Legal affairs. I stood there, listening to the hum of the air vents. My hands shook a little as I peeled the tape off and turned the brass key. It clicked, clean and quiet, like the start of something that shouldn't be starting. Inside, it smelled like dust and lemon cleaner, the way it always did after a Friday evening. His desk was empty except for a single folder, labeled Q4 Review, half open, pen still beside it. I could almost see him there, sleeves rolled up, glasses halfway down his nose, muttering numbers under his breath. I closed the door behind me and turned on the lamp. The walls looked different in the silence. Dozens of frames, all perfectly aligned. Employee of the Year plaques. A photo of him shaking hands with the regional director. A picture of his daughter, or maybe niece, at some graduation. Every frame dusted, every corner precise. He wasn't a sentimental man, but his order had always been surgical. I stepped closer, studying them. The light from the lamp hit the glass, and for a second I saw my own reflection. Pale, tired, unsure. Then something else, a thin line of paper, just visible behind the cardboard backing of one frame. I froze. It wasn't a reflection. It was a folded document tucked between the frame and the wall. I reached up, lifted the frame carefully, and felt the weight shift. Something inside. The nail creaked as I pulled it free. Behind it, a sealed manila envelope. My heart pounded. I set it on the desk. There were faint smudges on the corner. Fingerprints, maybe, or dust where someone had hesitated before. I turned it over. Written in neat, slanted handwriting, his handwriting, were the words, "Start with me." For a moment, I just stood there. The building felt too quiet, like sound itself was holding its breath. I opened the envelope. Inside, not money, not a will, but something stranger. A list of names, dozens of them. Some familiar, co-workers, supervisors, old staff. Next to each, a date, a project code, and a single word in red pen. Paid, settled, lost. My name wasn't there. I sat back in his chair, the one that always squeaked to the left, and tried to process it. What was this? Why me? The hallway lights flickered once, motion sensors catching up to time, and I felt something tighten in my chest. A thought I didn't want to entertain yet. He hadn't written that message for curiosity. He'd written it for someone he trusted to finish something. I put the envelope down, looked around the room once more, and whispered to the empty air, "What were you hiding, Martin?" The silence answered like a confession waiting for its priest, and I didn't know it yet, but that single question would cost someone everything. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had to be some kind of posthumous audit, a dead man's paperwork, maybe a side project he hadn't logged in the system. But when I went back the next evening, it wasn't curiosity anymore. It was obligation, the kind you can't explain but can't ignore either. The key turned smoother this time, like the office had accepted my trespass. I locked the door behind me and stared at the wall of frames. There must have been 20, maybe more, all aligned like soldiers. The first one had already given me the list. The rest, I couldn't leave them hanging. One by one, I lifted them off the wall. Behind each, an envelope. No dust, no random clutter. They'd been placed there intentionally, precisely like chapters in a book he never wanted anyone to read while he was alive. Each was labeled in pencil. A, C, D, H, internal, legal, personal. I stacked them on the desk, took a breath, and started opening. The first few were photocopies. HR forms, complaint letters that had never reached the board, employee statements about overtime discrepancies, harassment ignored, promotions mysteriously revoked. Each file had sticky notes in his handwriting. Handled. Reversed through payroll. Quiet settlement. Mr. Hale had been fixing things. Under the table, under the radar. Correcting wrongs no one else would even acknowledge. He'd always said, fairness doesn't have to be loud. I used to think that was just something managers said to sound profound. By the fourth envelope, the tone shifted. These weren't complaints. They were instructions. Typed letters addressed to unnamed recipients. If the audit is obstructed again, forward this to the external counsel. If termination lists reappear without my signature, deliver copies to the ethics board. He'd prepared for resistance, and every name tied to these letters belonged to someone higher up than him. At some point, I stopped keeping track of time. My coffee had gone cold. Each file told the same story, a quiet war under fluorescent lights. The company wasn't just inefficient, it was rotten. Promotions were bought, mistakes buried, careers traded like spare parts. And Hale, the man who never raised his voice, had been the only one keeping score. Then I found something that wasn't paper. Behind a frame of his Manager of the Year certificate was a small metal flash drive, taped flat to the backing, labeled simply Archive. I slid it into his computer. The login screen blinked, still active. His password hint popped up, the only date that matters. I tried his hire date, his birthday. Then, without thinking, I typed the date on the funeral program. The screen unlocked. Inside was a folder tree. Thousands of documents arranged like a legal time bomb. Emails, payroll trails, screenshots, meeting transcripts. Every unethical decision the company had made since 2016. and each folder had a tag: verified, duplicate, waiting, and at the bottom, one labeled personal. It was locked with a secondary password. I tried the same date again. Nothing. When I opened the properties, I noticed something strange. A hidden tag in the metadata. It wasn't a date or name, just 3 letters. ANC. It took me a few seconds to realize it was me, my initials. There's a moment when your stomach drops, but your brain keeps working. The split second before panic sets in. I clicked the folder again. It opened. Inside was one file. A scanned letter. His handwriting again. I started reading. Andrew, if you're seeing this, I didn't get to finish. Don't panic. You're safe. You think I protected you once. I did. But it wasn't from the mistake they blamed you for. It was from the people who tried to erase it. You weren't supposed to know this side of me, but you're the only one I can trust to decide what happens next. Behind the frames, you'll find everything. Choose what to do with it. If you walk away, no one will blame you. But if you don't, if you decide to finish what I started, don't hesitate. Truth has to move fast or it gets buried again. No signature this time, just his name printed at the bottom. M. Hale. I sat there, heart hammering, realizing what I'd stumbled into. He hadn't been documenting a company. He'd been documenting a crime scene. That was the first time I felt angry at him. Not because of what he did, but because he'd dragged me into it without consent. He'd made me the custodian of something that could destroy careers, families, maybe even my own. I stood, paced the length of the office. My reflection caught in the glass walls, fractured by light. I looked like a man in interrogation. Same posture, same exhaustion. Every instinct screamed to lock it all back up and forget it. But then I noticed one more envelope, smaller, tucked behind the photo of his daughter, or niece, or whoever she was. No label this time. Inside were 4 business cards, clipped together. Names I recognized: CFO, head of HR, chief counsel, director of operations. Each had a date scrawled on the back. All within the next week. A schedule. There was also a sticky note, faded yellow, stuck to the bundle. 4 words in that same precise handwriting. They'll come looking soon. The office lights flickered, motion sensors reacting to my stillness, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't the only person he'd left a message for. Somewhere out there, other envelopes were waiting for other hands, and if they got to theirs before I got to mine, I might not have a choice about how this ended. I turned off the lamp, slid the flash drive into my pocket, and whispered into the dark, "They already are." Then I walked out, locking the door behind me, the sound of the latch echoing like the start of a countdown. The next morning, the office was buzzing like nothing had happened. Hale's death was already background noise. A new memo had gone out. HR had appointed an interim director. Smiles were stiff, condolences brief. The company had moved on, like it always does. I sat at my desk, pretending to work, while the flash drive burned a hole in my pocket. Every email notification felt like a trapdoor opening. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well and walked out. At home, I connected the drive again. This time, I didn't skim. I read. Every line, every folder, every note. He hadn't been keeping financial ledgers. He'd been keeping a moral one. Each folder was a name. Each name, a story. Some were small, a misfiled expense, a faked invoice. Others were brutal. Harassment covered up, safety reports deleted, internal investigations that never reached the board. Hale hadn't been documenting wrongdoing. He'd been balancing it, forcing redress where the system refused to. There were notes where he'd convinced directors to quietly rehire wrongfully terminated employees. Instances where he'd blackmailed a manager into reimbursing overtime out of their own bonus. He didn't expose them publicly. He manipulated them into doing the right thing. A quiet, relentless avenger with an Excel sheet and a conscience that didn't know when to stop. And then there was the file marked AC. My initials again. Inside, just one document. A record from 2018. Back then, a software failure had cost the company $80,000. I was blamed, written up, nearly fired. But the real error had been a system patch someone else forgot to install. One of the senior managers. I remembered Hale calling me into his office afterward. "Let me handle this," he'd said. I thought he meant smoothing it over. He hadn't. He'd taken the blame upward, then buried the truth sideways. His notes confirmed it. Collins covered, compensation arranged through Q2 reallocation, no exposure. He'd protected me? Quietly, efficiently. And now, posthumously, he was handing me the same weapon he'd wielded. But there was something darker underneath it all. The 4 business cards I'd found the night before, the CFO, the HR head, the chief counsel, the director of operations, each of them appeared again in the drive. Their folders weren't lists. They were dossiers. In the CFO's, falsified cost reports, payments rerouted to shell vendors, contracts tied to his brother-in-law's firm. In HR's, deleted harassment complaints, emails marked "Do Not Archive." The counsel's, directives to destroy drafts of whistleblower responses. And the director's, manipulation of audit timing to bypass regulatory scrutiny. Each folder had a final line in Hale's notes. Redemption optional. It wasn't blackmail. It was a sentence waiting for a trigger. He'd built an entire network of evidence timed to go off if he didn't manually reset it. A dead man's switch. That's what the schedule on those cards was for. Those dates weren't meetings, they were deadlines. He'd planned one last check-in with each of them, probably to renew the cycle of fear that kept them obedient. When he died, that mechanism died with him, unless someone restarted it. I spent the afternoon building a separate archive, duplicates of everything. I didn't want to believe what I was about to do, but logic had its own gravity. The files weren't just proof, they were leverage. And if the people Hale had been controlling realized the leash was gone, they'd clean house fast. By midnight, I'd encrypted 3 drives and labeled them with short tags: legal, press, internal. I wrote a single email draft to a journalist Hale had referenced in one of his notes, a name I recognized from an old expose about corporate fraud. Subject: your source wasn't finished. But I didn't send it. Not yet. Because at 12:42 a.m., my phone vibrated. Unknown number. No message. Just a missed call. Then another. And another. By the 4th one, a text came through. "We should talk. Tonight." No name. But I didn't need one. The timestamp matched the first of Hale's scheduled dates. The CFO. I didn't reply. Instead, I watched the typing bubble appear, then stop. Another message. "You have something that belongs to us." That's when the fear turned into anger. Not panic, just a deep, focused rage. Because I finally understood what Hale meant by, "If you decide to finish what I started." He hadn't been asking for help. He'd been leaving a loaded weapon. I drove back to the office before dawn. The city was still half asleep. Traffic lights blinking red on empty intersections. In my backpack, the 3 drives and a letter I'd written in case I didn't come back. When I reached the lobby, a janitor was mopping near the elevators. He barely looked up as I swiped my card and rode to the 12th floor. Hale's office was still dark. The blue legal seal had been replaced with a corporate padlock. I knelt, forced it open with a screwdriver, and slipped inside. The smell hit first. Dust and lemon again, but fainter now. Like even the air was moving on. I sat at his desk, opened his old computer, and plugged in my copy. The monitor flickered to life. 3 progress bars appeared, uploading to separate destinations. I didn't pray. I didn't second guess. Hale's network came alive like a ghost, exhaling through the wires. Emails shooting into outboxes, encrypted packages lighting up server paths. It took 11 minutes, then silence. No alarms, no sirens. Just the faint hum of a ventilation unit that didn't know it had just witnessed a detonation. When I stood to leave, I noticed a new detail I'd missed before. A single unframed photo lying face down on the shelf. I flipped it over. It wasn't of his family. It was a team picture, our department, 4 years ago. All of us smiling, Hale in the middle. On the back, one line in pen. People forget who they hurt. Make them remember? I stared at it for a long time, then put it back exactly where it was. By the time I stepped out into the corridor, the first emails had already started bouncing back. Auto replies from executives, vacation notices, read receipts. The system was waking up, and with it, every ghost Mr. Hale had been keeping quiet. That night, I stopped being the loyal employee. I became his witness. The next morning, the company looked normal from the outside. No police, no cameras, just another Tuesday of stale air and fluorescent lights. But inside, something had shifted. That subtle, unnatural quiet that follows before a storm hits the walls. At 9:17 a.m., the first email went company-wide. Effective immediately, all senior management meetings are postponed until further notice. 2 minutes later, an internal compliance review was announced. By noon, whispers replaced keyboard clicks. People leaned into cubicles like they were trading contraband. No one said Hale's name, but I heard it between every line. By Wednesday, the news broke outside. A business column in a mid-tier paper. Waverly Dynamics under audit for internal misconduct. The article cited anonymous documents, unreleased financial records, and HR correspondences, now under federal review. I sat in my car at lunch, reading the story 3 times over, my hands trembling just enough to spill coffee down my wrist. It wasn't just the exposure, it was the pattern, the exact order of events Hale had built into his notes. Everything was happening the way he'd predicted. By Friday, the CFO resigned for health reasons. The head of HR was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The chief counsel's email address stopped working entirely, and the director of operations, the man who'd signed my written warning 5 years ago, was escorted out by security in front of the entire floor. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, realizing each one had a name, a mortgage, a family. Retribution always sounds cleaner than it looks. That weekend I drove back to the office one last time. The locks had been changed again, but the janitor, the same one who never asked questions, buzzed me in. "Quick," he said. "They're clearing it all Monday." The air inside was colder than I remembered. I walked to Hale's old office, now stripped bare. The desk was gone, the walls empty except for faint squares where frames used to hang. Only one still remained, crooked on its hook. I stepped closer. It was the family photo, the one I'd never asked about. A woman and a teenage girl smiling in front of a lake. I lifted it down, the nails squeaking softly. Behind it, taped flat to the wall, was one last envelope, smaller than the others. My name again, written in steady pen. Inside, a single page. If this is the end of it, good. But remember, truth without mercy is just another cruelty. Don't become what we fought. Folded beneath it was a USB stick. When I plugged it into my laptop later that night, it contained only one file, a video. Hale sat at his desk, same tie, same calm eyes. The camera must have been hidden. The frame caught only his shoulders and hands. He spoke quietly, like to himself. People think balance is numbers. It's not. It's memory. It's making sure those who hurt others don't get to erase the evidence of it. I wasn't always right. Sometimes I punished the wrong ones. Sometimes I was too late. If anyone ever sees this, forgive the method. Don't forgive the silence. He reached forward and switched off the camera. I watched the screen go dark and just sat there, my apartment quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, sirens passed somewhere far away. Inside, I felt something between grief and relief. The strange calm of knowing the story was finally over, even if no one would ever tell it. Over the next week, the company collapsed inward like a lung. Contracts paused, accounts frozen, leadership dismantled piece by piece. But something else happened too, the kind of quiet miracle that doesn't make headlines. A former intern got her wrongful termination overturned. A janitor's unpaid overtime was reimbursed retroactively. 2 women who'd filed ignored harassment claims received settlements, officially recorded this time. No one mentioned Hale, but every correction bore his fingerprints. I didn't take credit. I didn't need to. I'd already played my part. When the last of the noise died down, I went back one final time, not to the office, but to his grave. It was unremarkable. No marble, no flowers. Just a small plaque that read, Martin Hale, 1962, 2023. I stood there with the photo from his desk, the one of the woman and the girl, and set it beside the stone. Guess you finished it, I said quietly, in your own way. The wind picked up, carrying dry leaves across the grass, and I thought about those words he left behind. Truth without mercy is just another cruelty. He'd lived in that space between justice and vengeance, and now, somehow, so had I. When I got home, I found myself staring at the empty wall above my desk. For a moment, I thought about hanging one of his frames there. A reminder, maybe. Instead, I left it bare. Some stories don't need to be displayed. Some truths are heavy enough without glass around them. Before turning off the light, I opened the last email I'd kept unsent, the one to the journalist. Subject, your source wasn't finished. I hovered over delete, then hit it. The world already knew enough. The rest could stay quiet. As I shut the laptop, I caught my reflection in the dark screen. Tired eyes, steady breath. And for the first time since that funeral, I didn't feel haunted, just finished. He wasn't the man I thought he was. He was something else. Rarer, harder to understand. A man who made things right when no one else was watching. And when I took down the last frame that night, the wall behind it was clean. So was I.